Well, good morning, and thank you very much to the FII Institute for having us here. We are talking about megashocks, and this decade surely started off with a lot of megashocks. We started off with a pandemic. Then we now have two geopolitical events, two wars, one in the Middle East, one in Europe. Overlying that, we have the ongoing problem of global warming, which we're addressing at COP, and there have been many mega shocks in terms of environmental disasters, and we obviously have what's happening with technology. So, this is a very good panel, and I'm going to start right away with Mr. Benjamin Hung, who is the CEO of Asia for Standard Chartered Banks. And we live in turbulent times, and you are navigating the turbulent times for one of the largest financial institutions in the world and one of the most global financial institutions. So from your vantage point, what are the most biggest exogenous shocks, the biggest problems you're seeing coming our way here?
Right. Thanks very much, Cornelia. I think to talk about shocks, we have to first try to make sense of where we are, of what's happening around the world. I do think we are living right now through a transition of a 1 in 100 year process. Okay, I think the world is moving from a unipolar world to a bipolar world, and eventually, I think, to a multipolar world. And I think this transition, unfortunately, creates conflicts. And these conflicts, unfortunately, have also amplified what are normal cycles. They've amplified them to become mega shocks, creating lots of unpredictability, a lot of volatility. Okay, and that's the world we live in. I do think, having spoken to a lot of clients, different sectors, many businesses are actually performing a lot of scenario planning. What if this? What if that? Okay, and unfortunately, in this world, there's only so much and so many what ifs you can do. We have to try to make sense out of it. Fundamentally, I do think US, China will work together, will have to work together. But from a business lens, I do think everyone needs to find a way to create a more resilient business model. This is typically through diversification. Diversification through buyers, diversification through supply chain, diversification through funding, diversification through currency. This is what's happening. I do think corporates will need to be a lot more nimble and be flexible in terms of reacting to this. But rather than, Cornelia, just to focus on mega shocks, I also need to remind people there are mega trends, there are mega opportunities. Let's not forget about them. I do think Asia will become an oasis of growth. I do think there will be new supply chain, new trade corridors, new wealth being created, new payment currency, and new infrastructure. And as all of us, we need to also focus on what are the macro trends beyond just what the micro conflicts are.
That's very good, thank you. And I'm just going to, working on what you just said with the multipolar world, with Dato Cheng here, who is the co-chairman and co-CIO, executive director of Value Partners Group. You work across all asset classes, essentially, in Asia, in China, and in the rest of Asia. So you're very well placed to look at that realignment between East and West, between North and South. How should this realignment be navigated to hopefully create the least amount of exogenous shocks?
Yeah, thank you, Cornelia. Yeah, I'll try to keep my response simple and straightforward. I think in the context of today's discussion, I think it's very important to look past the current very negative coverage in the Western media and look at what China has actually achieved. In my own opinion, what China has achieved is that it's one of the greatest success stories we have seen in the last 50 years. The Chinese, in many ways, have largely eliminated extreme poverty. They have created the world's largest middle class, 400 million people. They have transformed themselves into the world's factory. They lead in the use of green energy. They are pioneer in many aspects of science and technology. And they have achieved the national dream of national rejuvenation. So I feel that if we are truly serious about finding sustainable solutions to a world in crisis, surely we should examine what China has been doing, what they got right, what they got wrong, what might be relevant to societies outside China. Just two examples of what China has achieved. When the People's Republic of China was born in 1949, the lifespan of the average male person in China was 39. Today, it's 78. The US is 79. So that's a great stride for you. China has, in many ways, done something that people thought was impossible, because as recently as the 1960s, there was actual starvation in China, and per capita income based on World Bank was below that of sub-Saharan Africa. So they come a long way. Surely there must be lessons there for us to think about. Thank you.
That's very true. So you're basically saying, look, we should look east and learn the lessons from China.
Yes, we should look beyond the current situation where China's rise has created anxiety, even hostility in some quarters in the West. And and see, this is after all 18%. 18 out of every 100 human beings on the planet is actually a Chinese. And they really did a lot. Up till about 10 years ago, there were still 100 million people in China living below the poverty line as defined by the United Nations. By 2020, these 100 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty to a working class income. There is a lot of lessons there, especially for the global South.
Yeah, that's very good. And we're staying in the East. We're looking with Mr. Ji Jun-fu, managing partner of GTV Capital. GTV Capital has been investing in Asia for about 23 years, or for 23 years, particularly China and Southeast Asia. As such, you're very well placed to look at technology, because you have a good footprint in technology. How do you think technology will affect us? And will it be technology? What do we need to do that it's technology for the good and not technology for the bad? So we can navigate those mega shocks.
Yeah, thank you, Cornelia, for the question. And I think I just want to echo what Ben just mentioned around the shocks that we are having, and obviously the opportunities that we do see as well. And a lot of that transformation has been powered by technology shifts. Obviously, in the last 20 over years, we saw the internet, PC internet, mobile internet, how technology has helped to drive reconstruction of the value chain, compressing some of the inefficiency, and thereby gave rise to a new class of merchants and deliveries and platform players. So those are the good, right? And it creates a new class of companies. But at the same time, I think there is disruption. We have to recognize that certain offline retail, mom and pops are being disrupted. Some can transform themselves, others can't. So the question is, how do we bring this group of people to come along? Because that's what, in many essence, a lot of the governments do worry about, because it does create these social gaps, if you will, and it requires tech companies, platform companies to work alongside with the government to make these transformations possible. Technology has also is also a solution to address climate change. The improvement in solar technology, wind technology, we do need to invest in a new power grid. So because the distribution of energy is going to change when we go from fossil to green or renewables. So that transformation requires investments. But at the same time, we are creating new challenges. So I think in every aspect of the transformation, it creates opportunity, it creates challenges. And collectively, I think we have to work to solve this problem. I think AI is another new dimension altogether.
And it's very good. So basically, it's the winners and losers. We need to make sure we bring the losers along and we capitalize on the opportunities. So lastly, but not at all at least, Mr. Fenglei Fang, who is the founder and chairman of HOPU Investment. You are really invested across all sectors, you know, consumer technology, healthcare, financial services, and real estate. This gives you a really good view on, especially in China, on the state of play. How resilient do you think China and other Asian markets are towards to deal with mega shocks, which will come along? I mean, we will not get around them.
谢谢。我用中文讲哈。
Thank you. I would like to speak in Chinese. Mega shocks. Beginning from 97, we also went into 2008. In China and Asia, everyone got more prepared.
第二个呢，就是
Secondly,
亚洲，中国是
when it comes to
火车头，
Asia's economy,
不会垮。
China is the
现在是在逐步形成。
driving force. So there's a kind of consensus being built when it comes to real estate, local debt, small banks, and the stock market issues. We have to be very determined. Overall speaking, I believe
是上升的状态。
China is still in an upward spiral.
过去的15
In
年，
the past 15 years, there have been some major changes, some FDI coming from
出口这个模式
Europe and the US
FDI 和
into China, but in more recent years, many more FDIs are coming from within Asia. So we are very prepared. Thank you.
So you're very prepared and you're sort of resilient also within Asia. Now, I'm coming back to Mr. Hong. You know, looking at all these transitions, energy transition, dealing with shocks, all of that costs money, right? All of that is expensive. So how do you look at what that means for interest rates, for cost of doing business, from your vantage point as a global bank? Where are we going?
The two little I words that everyone wants to have a view on, which is so difficult to answer. But let me just offer a few thoughts, just for deliberation for the audience. Currently, I think we are in a higher for longer mode. I think the risk bias will be increasing towards high for less long. That's one, because increasingly inflation will become a component, but not the only component. Economic growth will be. Second, just to your point, I think the world will have to settle for a higher equilibrium on inflation. You talked about all the energy. I earlier referenced resilience in terms of supply chain, for example. Mm-hmm. Resilience is inflationary in it by itself. So if you opt for that, you will have to probably live with a slightly higher level of equilibrium.
Yeah, that's... Sorry.
I'll leave a third one, which I think there could be a structural divergence in the level of inflation between the West and the East because of the supply chain factors.
Yeah, that's very true. Reallocating supply chains does cost money. You've given Mr. Cheng, you have given Asia and Asia's and China's relationship with the rest of the world a lot of thought, right? And how do you see the relationship between China and other economies of the South, also the Middle East and especially also America? How do you see that develop, and how can we see it develop so we create the least amount of friction?
Well, the key here is quite straightforward again. I just don't see a good outcome for the world, for our planet, in the medium to long term, if we don't have true cooperation and a good relationship between the two key countries, the United States and China. These two countries, China and America, make up roughly 40% of the global economy. China alone, despite having slowed down its economy, is about 30% of global growth right now. America and China are responsible for approximately 45% of the entire global emissions. So you need them to talk to each other and cooperate with one another. And it's not a one-way street. I think the Chinese are very eager and remain very business-like. They want to learn from the West. I'm not so sure about the West, though, because I used to be myself a Western journalist for many years. And I see that the Western attitude has really become much more dogmatic and ideological in the way they look at China. It's a reverse of the Cold War. That was the way the Soviet Union used to look at the West. But now it's the West looking at China in an ideological and very, I would say, rigid way. Whereas the Chinese remain quite pragmatic and quite businesslike. The Chinese people, from my more than 30 years of covering the country as a professional investor, have paid a very heavy price for their success. They have strict social and political controls that require enormous discipline to live under.
Okay.
They have a one-child policy. The older people still remember the Cultural Revolution. So it's not like they got all this economic miracle thanks to somebody else's help.
Okay, so
they work for it, yeah.
So you're pleading for mutual understanding and for mutual understanding and for harmony. I will go on to Mr. Fu. When you look sort of at the centrifugal forces of sort of geoeconomics, how do you see Asia can really manage that? And I know you are quite concerned about the social implications of what's happening, of all the things we discussed, because we also need social harmony within the countries. Can you sort of give us a very brief overview of your views?
I think we have to address some of the common challenges that we do have. I think climate is one big issue. We talk about resiliency, and thereby we do have to face with a new equilibrium, higher inflationary pressure, and all these hit, all walks of life, across the social framework. And what that means is that we have to address a common problem. I think climate is a problem, and climate goes beyond just the energy transition. I think food security and food resiliency is one big factor. With the war that happens in Europe and around the world, and the climate change, we are facing more of the food security issue, and it translates into social problems. So those are areas where I think investors alike, government alike, can put their money to work and put the policies to work.
Yeah, and especially when we look at Asia over the last, let's say, century or so, we have seen times where food security was a real issue. So we have to be conscious of that. This brings me to the last question. Again, we're coming back to that all-important US-China relationship, Mr. Fang. Where do you see it going, and what can the US and China do in terms of collaboration to be able to deal with those exogenous shocks?
谢谢。首先，我想说，美国代表的是。
Thank you very much. First of all, I think what the U.S. represents is the Mediterranean culture, and the Chinese culture has never had a clash with Mediterranean culture, maybe because of the Himalayas. But I think what is between U.S. and China is Taiwan. China has drawn a red line. That U.S. cannot support independence of Taiwan. I think the Americans have already accepted this. So I think between them, we can avoid a hot war like Korean War, and we can also avoid the Cold War that had happened between the USA and USSR. I think conflicts will continue to be the daily thing. So with the San Francisco conference, we are talking about controlling this. And common sense has always been that ever since the trade war, the trade volume has grown multiple times. So the largest question is investment. With economic stability in China, American investors would not forego a 10 trillion consumer markets in the next 5 years.
Inspiring panel. And what we've seen is we're going towards a multipolar world, and these transitions, century-type transitions, are never easy. We have technology which can be for the good if we use it right. Everybody of you has pleaded for harmony and for learning also the lessons of the achievements of what has been achieved in Asia over the last 4 decades or so. Could you please give this great panel a big round of applause?